The cameras were rolling. The audience was settling into their seats. And Dr. Phil McGraw, a man who had spent 30 years navigating the most complex human emotions on national television, was about to witness something he had never seen before. Something so raw, so unexpected, that it would force him to do what he almost never does: stop the tape. In the middle of what seemed like a routine family intervention, a mother opened her mouth to speak. But what came out wasn't defensiveness. It wasn't justification. It was an apology so genuine, so stripped of ego, that the entire studio fell into a silence so profound you could hear the cameras whirring. Dr. Phil's expression shifted. His eyes, trained to read deception and deflection, registered something different. Truth. And pain. And regret that had been buried for 3 decades. He raised his hand. "Stop the tape." The producers froze. The crew exchanged glances. In over 4,000 episodes, Dr. Phil had rarely stopped production mid-show. But this wasn't about ratings. This wasn't about drama. This was about a human being finally breaking through 30 years of denial, and Dr. Phil recognized that the most important thing he could do in that moment was not to perform for the cameras, but to be present for the healing. What happened next is something no one in that studio, or watching at home, saw coming. 3 months earlier, a 32-year-old woman named Sarah had reached out to the Dr. Phil show with a story that had haunted her entire adult life. She was estranged from her mother, Linda, and had been for over a decade. The reason? A childhood marked by emotional neglect, broken promises, and a mother who had chosen addiction over her daughter time and time again. Sarah's email to the producers was simple but devastating. "I don't hate my mother. I just need her to see me. Really see me. Just once before it's too late." The show's team conducted their due diligence. They spoke with Sarah. They spoke with Linda. They reviewed timelines, interviewed family members, and slowly pieced together a story that was all too common in America. A mother who had struggled with alcoholism during her daughter's formative years, a father who had left when Sarah was 7, and a little girl who had learned to parent herself because no one else would. Linda had agreed to come on the show. But in the pre-interviews, she was defensive. She minimized. She deflected. "I did my best," she kept saying. "I wasn't perfect, but I kept a roof over her head." The producers warned Dr. Phil, this was going to be a tough one. Linda wasn't ready to take accountability. Sarah was fragile but determined. It had all the makings of a confrontation that could go very wrong, very quickly. But Dr. Phil had been doing this long enough to know that sometimes, when people are forced to sit in a room and face the truth, something shifts. Not always. But sometimes. The day of the taping arrived. Sarah sat in the guest chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes red from crying even before the cameras started rolling. Linda sat across from her, arms crossed, jaw set. The audience could feel the tension before a single word was spoken. Dr. Phil opened with his trademark directness. "Linda, your daughter says you were never really there for her. That she raised herself. That she can't remember a single time you told her you were proud of her. How do you respond to that?" Linda's response was textbook defensiveness. "That's not fair. I worked 2 jobs. I kept food on the table. She had clothes, she had a home. What more did she want?" Sarah's face crumpled. It was the answer she'd been hearing her whole life. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Linda, I didn't ask if you provided shelter. I asked if you were there for her emotionally." The conversation went in circles for 20 minutes. Linda deflecting. Sarah pleading. The audience shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Dr. Phil, ever the skilled navigator, tried different angles. He brought up specific memories Sarah had shared, birthdays forgotten, school events missed, the times Sarah had won a writing award and Linda had been too drunk to attend the ceremony. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He had just asked Linda a simple question. "Do you know what your daughter does for a living?" Linda hesitated. She works in an office, I think." Sarah's face went pale. "Mom, I'm a pediatric nurse." I've been a pediatric nurse for 6 years. I've told you this. Multiple times. The audience gasped. It was such a small detail, but it contained everything. A mother who didn't know her own daughter's profession wasn't just absent physically, she was absent in every way that mattered. Dr. Phil sat back in his chair. He looked at Linda with an expression that wasn't anger, but something deeper. Disappointment, maybe? Or sadness for what this family had lost. Linda, he said quietly, do you understand what just happened? Your daughter takes care of sick children for a living. She spends her days comforting other people's kids. And you don't even know that about her. Something in Linda's face began to crack. The defensiveness was still there, but beneath it, something else was stirring. Dr. Phil saw it. He always saw it. Can I show you something? Dr. Phil reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. He handed it to Linda. Your daughter wrote you a letter. She gave it to our producers last week. She said she wanted you to read it, but she was afraid you wouldn't. So she asked me to make sure you did. Linda took the envelope with shaking hands. She opened it slowly, pulled out 3 handwritten pages, and began to read. The camera stayed on her face. The audience was completely still. Sarah watched her mother, tears streaming down her face, waiting for a reaction that might never come. Linda read for what felt like an eternity. And then, about halfway through the second page, her hands started to tremble. Her breathing became uneven. And then, for the first time since the taping began, she looked up at her daughter with eyes that were finally, truly seeing her. Sarah, Her voice broke. She tried again. I didn't know. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah leaned forward slightly, hope and fear warring on her face. Didn't know what, Mom? Linda clutched the letter to her chest. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I mean, I knew I wasn't good. But reading this, reading how you felt when I missed your graduation, how you cried yourself to sleep wondering if I loved you. Sarah, I didn't know it was this bad. Dr. Phil's voice was gentle but firm. Linda, did you think Sarah was exaggerating? Did you think she was being dramatic? Yes, Linda whispered. I thought kids were resilient. I thought she'd just move on. But she didn't move on, did she? Dr. Phil asked. She's 32 years old and she's still waiting for her mother to see her. Linda's face collapsed. The walls she had built for 30 years came crashing down all at once. I see her, she sobbed. God, I see her now. And I am so sorry. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He stood up. He walked over to Linda, bent down, and spoke to her in a voice so low the microphones barely caught it. Linda, this is the most important moment of your life. What you do right now will determine whether your daughter spends the rest of her life wondering if her mother ever loved her, or if she gets to finally heal. Do you understand me? Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Phil straightened up and looked at his producers. Stop the tape, he said again. Give them a minute. The cameras stopped rolling. The audience remained silent, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing something sacred. Dr. Phil walked off the stage and into the wings, giving mother and daughter space that wasn't for television, wasn't for entertainment. It was for them. For 5 minutes the crew stood frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. And then, through the studio monitors, they could see it. Linda had crossed the space between the chairs. She was on her knees in front of Sarah, holding her daughter's hands, speaking words that the microphones weren't picking up but that everyone in the room could feel. When Dr. Phil returned to the stage, he didn't ask for the cameras to roll again immediately. He sat down quietly and waited. Finally, Linda looked up at him, her face blotchy and raw from crying, and said the words that every therapist waits a lifetime to hear from a client in denial. I was wrong. About everything. I told myself I was doing enough because I couldn't face the truth that I was barely doing anything. I was so wrapped up in my own pain, my own addiction, my own selfishness, that I convinced myself Sarah was fine. Because if she wasn't fine, that meant I was a bad mother. And I couldn't handle that. Dr. Phil nodded slowly. Linda, that is the most honest thing you've said since you sat down. And it's the beginning of healing. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. He leaned forward, his voice steady but weighted with the gravity of the moment. Are you ready to do the work? Not just say you're sorry, but actually show up for your daughter in a way you never have before? Because Sarah deserves more than words. She deserves action. She deserves a mother who fights for this relationship the way she's been fighting for it her whole life. Linda looked at Sarah, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in decades. I'm ready, she said. I don't know how to do it, but I'm ready to learn. If you'll let me. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I've been waiting my whole life for you to say that. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small jewelry box. He placed it on the table between them. Sarah, when you contacted us, you also sent something else. You said it was something you'd been holding on to since you were 16 years old, and you wanted to give it to your mother if she ever became the person you needed her to be. Sarah's eyes widened. She had forgotten about that. The producers had asked her if there was anything symbolic, anything that represented what she wanted from this relationship, and she had sent them something without really believing this moment would ever come. Dr. Phil opened the box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm, a small heart with the word, Mom, engraved on it. You bought this with money from your first job, Dr. Phil said, looking at Sarah. You were going to give it to your mother for her birthday that year. But she never showed up to the dinner you had planned. So you kept it. For 16 years you kept it, hoping one day you'd have a mother worth giving it to. The audience was openly crying now. Linda stared at the bracelet as if it were a grenade about to explode. You kept that? All this time? Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Phil picked up the bracelet and held it out to Linda. This is not just a piece of jewelry. This is 16 years of hope. This is your daughter believing, against all evidence, that you could change. The question is, are you going to honor that hope, or are you going to break her heart one more time? Linda took the bracelet with trembling hands. She stared at it, at the word, Mom, at the weight of everything it represented. And then she did something no one expected. She fastened it around her own wrist, looked at Sarah and said, I'm going to wear this every single day. And every time I look at it, I'm going to remember what I almost lost. And I'm going to be the mother you deserved all along. Dr. Phil stood up. The cameras were rolling again, but it didn't matter. This moment transcended television. Linda, Sarah, we've arranged for you both to enter a family therapy program. It's 6 months, intensive, and it's not going to be easy. But if you both commit to it, you have a chance to rebuild what was broken. Are you in? They both nodded. Linda reached across the space between them, and Sarah, after 32 years of waiting, finally let her mother hold her hand. The audience rose to their feet. The applause wasn't performative, it was cathartic. They had witnessed something real. Something that reminded them of their own broken relationships and the power of one genuine apology. Dr. Phil stood at the edge of the stage, watching mother and daughter embrace for the first time in over a decade. His eyes were wet. In 30 years of doing this work, he had learned that true change is rare. But when it happens, when someone finally breaks through their walls and chooses vulnerability over ego, it makes every difficult conversation worth it. As the credits prepared to roll, Dr. Phil turned to the camera one last time. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you need to reach out to, don't wait. Because the hardest words to say, I was wrong and I'm sorry, are also the most powerful. Share this video. Subscribe. And make sure stories like this continue to be told. 6 months later, the show received a letter. It was from Sarah. Enclosed was a photo, mother and daughter, arms around each other, both smiling. Linda was still wearing the bracelet. And in Sarah's handwriting, a simple note. Thank you for giving me my mother back.